Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be doing my July reading wrap-up, coming to you a few weeks later than I would like, but, I knew the summer was going to be busy for me, and I will have lots of life updates in my August wrap-up, which will be coming very soon. But in the month of July, I read 4 books, and so I figured I would do a really quick wrap-up so I could talk about those books, because I do like having, a record of all the books that I read throughout the year on my channel. So the first book that I finished in the month of July was Lessons in Chemistry by Garmus. This was a book that I picked up kind of on a whim. I got an email from Barnes & Noble that was like, these are our editors or whatever's top picks of books for the year and things like that. And I've been feeling a little bit like I haven't really been paying attention to what books are popular right now and reading those, which is totally fine. No one needs to be reading the most popular books and things like that. But there is a small part of me that felt like I've been missing out on some of the fun book conversations that can happen when a book gets kind of popular. And so this is one that was on that list. I was planning on doing a whole reading vlog around reading the books on the list. Didn't work out. But this is what I got from the library because it was on that list. And I ended up really enjoying it. This is a book that takes place in the 1960s, and you are following this woman named Elizabeth Zott, who is a chemist. Elizabeth Zott is a very straightforward, no-nonsense woman who has dreams of becoming this really big deal scientist, but it's the 1960s, and so a lot of research firms and institutes are not willing to give her a chance because she's a woman. And so part of the story is about her overcoming the extreme sexism that she has to deal with throughout her entire life. But you find out at the beginning of the story that although she started off as a chemist, she's now a mother, and she is the host of a cooking show on television called Supper at 6. And so you basically get to see sort of her life and what led to her getting to that point, which is very different from where she thought her life would be at. So this is a historical fiction book, but there is a significant amount of lightheartedness to this book. It feels almost like a 1960s sitcom. Some of the ways that things are written, it's the type of story that would use the word hijinks. It's not crazy some hijinks do occur, let's be real. But it's also really enjoyable for someone who enjoys stories with strong women at the lead. Elizabeth Zott is I said, very straightforward and very no nonsense. And so to her, women are no different from men and they should be treated equally. But obviously it's the 1960s. And not obviously, but because it's the 1960s, there is a significant amount of prejudice as to the way that Elizabeth Zott should be seen and the things that she should be doing and the things that she should be saying, etc. There are parts of this book that are extremely frustrating to read because there is a significant amount of miscommunication that happens throughout this story with her and the various men that she comes into contact with. Elizabeth is one of those people who doesn't understand the subtleties, the way the different genders are treated. That was starting to get under my skin a little bit, to be honest, and sometimes I just wanted to shake Elizabeth and be you have to be aware of the world that you're living in. Even though it's great that you're pushing forward and trying to break boundaries and to be treated equally, sometimes she just wouldn't understand how other people were operating, and I'm just I need you to study this world just as well as you study your little science experiments. So overall, I think I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars because it's a really fun read. It's a book that I could easily recommend to a lot of different people, especially if you're someone who wants something a little bit more lighthearted but still wants some level of depth and complexity to the story. There is some heartbreak that happens in here. There's a little bit of a love story that happens in here and things like that. But overall, I enjoyed my experience with this book, and I can definitely understand why it's really popular. It's very readable, it's very engaging. I could definitely see this not working with certain people who don't like the tone of this story. So I feel if you read the first couple chapters, you'll get a sense for the way that it's written. And if you're vibing with it, I think you'll vibe with the story. Next up, I read The Avant-Guards Volume 1. This is a comic series that I had kind of picked up on a whim, the graphic art style just kind of caught my eyes one time when I was at a comic book store, and I usually like the things that are put out by Boom Studios. In this story, you are following this character named Charlie who transfers to basically arts and drama school, specifically an arts and drama college, and she ends up joining the basketball team. So basically there's a girl in here who gets into cahoots with other theater and arts colleges in the area, and all of them decide to start up basketball teams, and they end up getting money for all this stuff. And so what they don't realize is that Charlie actually has a past playing basketball, and so it's part of her finding her place at this college and partially about joining this ragtag team of people. This is not a very long comic. This volume, I think, only has like 4 or 5 issues. And so I do plan on getting the other comics from the library. I really enjoyed my experience with it. I think if you're someone who enjoys like Giant Days and those sorts of like college comics, I think you'll really enjoy this one as well. It's kind of like if Giant Days had a baby with Pitch Perfect, but instead of about being an a cappella group, it was actually about a basketball team. That's kind of what you would get here. So if that sounds up your alley, if you want like a lighthearted, fun comic, then this is a really good one to check out. Again, I plan on picking up the other volumes from the library because this was just like a really fun experience. And there's like lots of different, types of characters that are included in here. It's a just lighthearted, fun Boom Studios comic that I feel like I could recommend to lots of different people. Next up, I finished reading Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. This was the Chunky Chapter Book Club pick for the month of July. The Chunky Chapter Book Club is my Patreon book club where we try to read books that are over 500 pages. I have a link to it down in the description in case you are interested in checking it out. But Wives and Daughters was the July pick, and this was a really interesting experience. I have never read Elizabeth Gaskell before, so I didn't really know what to expect from it. And prior to this being picked as the July pick, I didn't realize that this was her final novel, and I didn't realize that this novel was never finished. So this book was being written by Elizabeth Gaskell when she passed away, and she had apparently had like extensive notes and research and like an extensive outline set up for this story. So like basically when you get to the end of the book, you have like the editor telling you what would have happened in this story. So that was like one of the really interesting things about this story. And then the other interesting thing about the story is just sort of like how it's set up for its time period. The story was written in the 1860s, and it's really interesting to see sort of how the characters are written and sort of like the things that they go to, because it feels like very progressive for its time. The main character, Mary, is someone who doesn't fall into like the typical female things. Her mother passed away when she was younger, and so it was just her and her father, and so she's interested in the things that her father seems to be interested in. He's a doctor, and so she knows a lot about like science and bodies and things like that. You have this side character of Cynthia who was like sent off to a boarding school, and when she returns, she's very like independent and headstrong, and you find out that she's like been a part of this like really complicated situation, which I won't get into because it's kind of spoilers, that I was not expecting at all. And also just like the way that she handles like men and relationships feels like very much not a thing that I would expect to see in a book from the 1800s. I like went back and forth about whether or not I enjoyed this book or not, but in the end I ended up really enjoying it. There are parts of it that really bothered me. There are parts of it where like the characters were really annoying, but it all kind of worked and made sense, and I was like very pleasantly surprised by the end of it. It is unfortunate that like there will never be like a fully written complete ending, but I think that by the point that it ends, and with knowing like sort of like where the characters are going to end up, it's very understandable, and like I feel like it's still like an enjoyable experience. So yeah, I'm really glad we ended up reading this one for the Chunky Chapter Book Club, because I don't think I would have picked it up otherwise. And I'm definitely going to like try to include more Elizabeth Gaskell in future picks, or at least future polls, because the Patreons vote on which books they want to read, and so I can definitely see like picking up North and South or something like that in the future, because I really enjoyed my experience with this one. All right, and the final book that I'm going to talk about in this video is Sabbath by Dan B. Allender. This is a little bit of a different book than I usually talk about on my channel. But when I was doing my like bookshelf rebuild thing, I showed off that I have like basically a shelf of Christian books, and there were a couple of people in the comment section who said that they would be interested in hearing my thoughts on those books. Some of those books are really old, and so I don't feel like qualified to talk about them or to recommend them, because I feel like I need to reread them with more modern eyes. But this is a book that I picked up that I really enjoyed. Part of my church, I'm doing basically like a discipleship type of class where it feels like a college course almost, where we're digging into various topics. A lot of the books that we're reading, we're kind of reading it in parts, like we're picking up chapters here and there, kind of like a college class where it's about a topic and things like that. And so anyways, long story short, we're doing like a study about Sabbath. This is one of the books that was on the list, and I read the first chapter as part of like the study, and then I was like, I just want to read this entire book because this first chapter was fantastic. So if you are someone who is interested in learning more about Sabbath, this was a really fantastic book. I think that the way that Dan Allender writes is like, for me, a good balance of accessible but still like knowledgeable, because I find with a lot of Christian books, they're very like, they can be very like theological and like almost like college textbooks in nature, or they can be like so accessible or like so written to the public, but then it just feels like you're reading someone's blog. And I have a hard time with both ends of the spectrum for different reasons. And this one feels kind of like a nice middle point. I think that the way that Allender talks about the way that you can approach Sabbath to be a way to make Sabbath more accessible, I think like, you know, one of the things that we did as a part of the class was to talk about sort of like our conceptions around Sabbath, like what has people taught us that Sabbath is supposed to be like. And like one of the things was like, you think of, you know, Orthodox Jews who like don't do literally anything for an entire 24-hour period and things like that. And Allender looks at it in a different sort of lens of like, there are things that you can and potentially should be doing during Sabbath, and it might not be necessarily the way that you've thought of it before. And this is really like changed my point of view of like how I Sabbath. You know, resting is not a thing that I do well, and it's a thing that I've been working on. And so part of the class is like incorporating Sabbaths into our lives and incorporating times of rest and rejuvenation. And this has really like changed my perspective on like what that means for me personally. I figured, you know, I read this whole book, figured I might as well include it in this list. I think that it would be a really useful resource for lots of different people. If you are also someone who has a hard time resting, or you have a hard time doing like a spiritual Sabbath or anything along those lines, I think that this would be worth picking up. So yeah, those are the books that I wanted to talk about in the month of July. Like I said earlier, August was a crazy month, as you could tell by the fact that like I basically didn't post. I will be hopefully recording my August wrap up really soon, and so that will be coming shortly. So yeah, I'm very excited to get that one out for you all. But yeah, thank you so much for everyone for watching. If you have any questions or comments about any of the books that I mentioned in this video, feel free to leave that down in the comment section. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.